Hey, so I'm just gonna get straight in the video. I've had a couple people ask me, what do you think about the Canon EOS R, the R1? And all I've gotta say is, it's just gimmicky marketing bullshit. And you should switch from Canon to Sony or Fujifilm or Panasonic or Leica as soon as possible. Because what Canon's gonna do is they're going to brick every single camera in order to protect themselves and to get you to spend more money. And this is the way they've been going with their mirrorless system. The R3 doesn't mean anything. It's gonna have some new technology that Canon will be able to again say, well, you know, it's our new stacked CMOS sensor. We built it ourselves, so that's why the performance is lacking. They're gonna throw gimmicks at you like at 30 frames per second, but not tell you if it's gonna be in 50 megapixel, 80 megapixel, 24 megapixel, 20 megapixel with that 30 frames per second. They do things where they give you vague video structure, kind of like they did with the R5 and R6, but at the same time, when you get it in your hands and you see the 8K, the 4K, and it overheats, they're not going to apologize. Or they're going to do even worse, they're going to come out with an R3C the way they came out with an R5C. You see, to be able to understand how much bullshit Canon gives its consumers and why Canon fanboys are most likely the most manipulated and worse at spending money that they don't have whenever it comes to this gear, or actually spending money on gear that isn't worth a shit in the long run, let me just explain the history of Canon's full frame cameras as far as with their digital. So if we start looking at the 5D and the 1DX, those are Canon's two professional cameras. That's what they would call their professional cameras. Now, with that, they're still segmented. Now, we're gonna come back to segmenting products in a second. You see, Canon's 5D was a fantastic camera. For the 5D Mark IV, it had things like 4K, even though it was in motion JPEG, but we won't get into that. It's still tons of a lot easier to deal with than dealing with the raw files they have right now and the codec they have in their mirrorless cameras. But you still had things like 4K, you had a high frame rate. I mean, it was a really nice camera, really bulky. Now with the 1DX Mark 1, 2, and 3, you had the luxury of a built-in battery grip that lasted with those amazing batteries, and you had the luxury of those card slots that were super duper fast. They could read, write at amazing speeds, and it was just a professional's camera, and they marketed it as such. That is the top of the line. And then whenever you wanted a prosumer camera, that's where the 6D comes into effect. The Canon 6D was still a full frame, but it was there to where people could come in the prosumer bit and really get their feet wet with Canon and be able to get them to pair up with their nice EF lenses. It was a smart decision. That's only 3 cameras though. Let's look at what Canon's doing right now. See, Canon has been made more and more aware over the years that they can get away with gouging and really manipulating their customers. There's no better example than the way they have the EOS R, which seemed professional, and it was supposed to be going at the A7, but then they said it wasn't really their professional camera, and it was this whole thing. Then they released the RP, which was their entry level, but the R was supposed to be their entry level, and they both didn't do too well in RAW, and they had that weird crop, and they didn't do too well in video, and they had a slow frame rate, and the autofocus was horrible, and I still don't remember who that was supposed to compete for. To be honest with you, with either of those cameras, if you're looking at getting an R or an RP and you don't have a camera system yet, I would go with Fujifilm APS-C and get you an X-T4, get you an X-T3 even, because it's gonna be better than anything you're getting from Canon. So what next? That's 2 cameras. So does that mean the RP and the R are gonna replace the 6D and the 5D? Not really the case. Then you had the R6 and the R5 come out. 8K, right? 4K, C-Log, all these amazing things, except for it overheated. And they didn't even really publicize and market it as a photography camera, which it did fantastic at. So it had all these features that they marketed you to get the camera, and it didn't even perform. The even bigger slap in the face was then they released the Canon C70, which made everyone think, okay, the R5 and the R6, this is their 2 top-of-the-line cameras. This is basically, has to be like their 1DX-ish that they're gonna have for a few years, and their 5D lineup. And the C70 is for more cinema things. That's for videography. Except they brick the C70 by not putting RAW in it, but they put RAW in the R5, R6. But then they just announced they're gonna make an R5C, which means that it's going to be the cinema version, so it's not going to have all the limitations that the R5 had. And so basically, if you bought the R5 for the video, you're f***ed, because the R5C is the exact same camera, but the only difference between the R5C and the R5 is a little bit bigger body, so it doesn't overheat. So they already knew immediately it'd overheat, and basically they're screwing you over for cash. Now we're getting the R3, which is between the 1DX and the R5 is what's said. And I want you to really think, do you for 1 second believe that Canon is going to give you 30 frames per second at a 50 megapixel rate and not something like they're going to dump down 24 because they don't want you to be able to be eating into their future R1 lineup and the revenue and proceeds from that? Really think about it. Canon is now going to be segmenting their full frame mirrorless lineup into 7 cameras. The RP, the R, the R5, the R6, they've got the EOS R5C, they've got the EOS R3, and the R1. 3 of those haven't even been released. And even more, does that mean the RP and the R died? Does that mean they stopped getting the firmware updates? Does that mean there's nowhere else for those to go? This is the thing that's going to continue to happen with Canon. Canon is going to continue to manipulate every single one of you until someone, a reviewer or something who's big out there, says this is bullshit, and we're tired of it. Do you really think Canon's going to give you really good cinema quality in the R3? Do you really think they're going to give you the best photography quality they can? Why would they do that when the R1's around the corner? They're trying to get you with these gimmicks, with the eye focusing, with the new stack sensor. Do you really think they're going to not rush this R3 in response to the A1 like they rushed the R5 and the R6 because they knew the AS7 III was coming out, which they both tanked, and now they took your money with the C70 and they're going to take your money again with the R5C. Imagine spending money on the EOS R5 and then immediately Canon, about 6 months later, releasing an EOS R5C, which is basically everything that you paid, the thousands of dollars you paid to get in the R5, but it's in another camera. So if you want the R5 to actually function the way that it was marketed to you, you have to buy the R5C. The money doesn't work out. So here's my thing. Don't buy the EOS R3. The reason why Canon is dangling these 3 cameras in front of you is so you don't switch to Sony. It's so you don't go to Fujifilm. It's so you don't go to Panasonic. Do you think Canon really wanted to release the EOS R5C? No, but they can make money off it. What they saw was they'd rather release something that someone's gonna buy, and that maybe fanboys and people that are so gung-ho Canon and believe the lie and the myth of Canon colors, which is just literally a magenta cast and it's just oversaturated. I can in 30 seconds make any Nikon, any Olympus, any Fujifilm, any Panasonic shot look identical to a Canon straight out of camera photo. And then Canon thinks you're stupid because you're stupid when you don't think about the fact that you guys edit your photos. If I had $1 for every time I was on Instagram, Flickr, something, Reddit, where a Canon user took a photo and then completely edited the shit out of it, because that's what Canon users do, I'd be pretty damn rich. And I mean edit the shit out of it. You have a nice green background with trees and you're editing it to make it look like it's fall. You've got a nice blue sunny sky and you're editing it to make everything look purple and their face look cool and cold, and I don't know what's going on with the Photoshop and the Lightroom sliders. See, this is what Canon does. They take advantage of the fact that for years they've lived off of a couple things: marketing their glass, marketing the ruggedness of their bodies, and marketing the Canon colors. And let me tell you something. Canon colors are a lie. They're not the best colors, and they're not even the most accurate. In fact, Olympus and the Sony A1 are way more accurate than Canon, and to be honest with you, I never had good experience with a Canon camera on people of color skin tone, and we can get into that later, but that magenta cast is not good for people with any kind of melanin or any kind of tanness in their skin. The other thing is the fact that are Canon bodies that much better than anyone else? No, they're not. In fact, Nikon professional bodies in the DSLR format are so much better as far as the features you get on that camera than the Canon camera. And to be honest with you, with a lot of these Canon cameras, you could get into a medium format camera now with Fujifilm, or even just save up and spend a couple, maybe $1,000 or a few hundred more with another medium format system, and be able to actually shoot better if you're doing for portraits and you're doing for product photography. If you want sports photography, there's no reason why you shouldn't go over to Sony. You see, here's the thing. Canon's relying on you and your vulnerability and your naivety and your willingness to stick with them because of brand loyalty. For some reason, everyone thinks that brand loyalty makes them a great person. Canon's hoping that you stick to that same conversation, that same rhetoric, for one reason, because it prolongs the fact that they don't have to come out with anything that's, you know, inventive, that's, you know, anything that is new or creative. They're just going to keep on copying Sony, and they'll be 2 years back every single time. The R5 and the R6 still don't touch the autofocus of the Sony a7 III. That's a problem. Their video capabilities, even in 4K, still don't touch the Sony a7 III whenever it comes to the S-Log, the focusing, all these things. So what does Canon have above Sony? Nothing but a naive fan base and great marketing. If I were you, I wouldn't buy the EOS R3. If I were you, I wouldn't buy the R5. I wouldn't buy the R6. If I were you, I wouldn't buy the R1. If I were you, I wouldn't even buy the R or the RP anymore. I would switch everything over, sell my gear, or adapt my glass to Sony. Why? Well, for the plain simple fact of this: Sony is the better company. Sony is the best company, and I shoot Fujifilm. This is all objective as someone who's worked with Sony cameras, Canon cameras, Fujifilm cameras, Olympus cameras. I've used a whole bunch of systems, and for professional work and for day-to-day work, I did use Canon, Sony, and Fujifilm. And Canon's not touching either of those two. It's plain and simple it. Canon is still riding on the fact that people think their glass is something special, and it's not. Sony's glass lineup has caught up to them. Fujifilm has sharper glass than a lot of Canon lenses, and honestly, they're nothing compared to Leica. People lush about the Canon colors. You don't know anything about Canon colors. There's not a thing. It's something that branding took over and you ran with it, and your favorite Tony Northrup probably said it in a couple of videos. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter. Canon is a company that is going to continue to drop and drop and drop. The autofocus game is already setting them back, but now their inability to come out with cameras that actually function correctly because they don't want to bite into their cinema line is even worse. Canon's greed will be their downfall, and I'm excited about it, because for me what that means is that there will be a new number 2, and hopefully these companies start rocketing forward, or it puts Sony in such a good position that their cameras become more accessible, more affordable, and maybe it'll push them to correct their color science a little bit more and more of their prosumer cameras. So that's it. I don't really want to talk about the R3 because it's non-relevant and it's not a camera you should buy, but I understand some of you will, and for that, all I have to say is good luck.